Okay, welcome back, ladies. We're going to talk in this video about section 11.5, which is about getters and setters, getters are also called accessors, setters are also called manipulators or modifiers. So we'll be talking about those. We'll divide this up into two parts. We'll talk about getters and simple setters in the first part, and the second part we'll talk about more complicated setters. So, here's an example of getters. Now, getters and setters are special methods that you include in the definition of a class, and they allow you to either retrieve the values of instance variables, which are what getters are, also called accessors, and setters allow you to change the values of instance variables. That's what I call setters, or manipulators, or modifiers. So here are a couple of simple getters. The first one is for the name variable that's part of the student class. Notice that a getter will always return some sort of value of some type. So in this case, the name is a string. It will return a string. We'll call it getName. It doesn't necessarily need any passed parameters, although we have an example of where we do need a passed parameter when we want to get a particular grade. So this only statement in the getter is this simple one, which is simply return this dot name. Return the name associated with this object, whatever it happens to be. So the important thing is to realize that since the instance variables, as they're defined up here at the top, are private, we talked about private and public, since they're private variables, they cannot be accessed directly by a calling program. The only way that you can get the values of those instance variables that are associated with a particular object is through a getter. So this is the getter that gets you the name. Now, the getter that gets you a particular value of the grade, we need to know a little bit more. Of course, it needs to return a double, because that's what the grades are. But it also needs an indication of what the value of the index is. The grade is an array, so with the index we tell it which grade we want, which grade out of the entire value of the array. So, to this particular getter, all we need to do is say return this dot grade array sub index, which goes out to the grade array to the number index, whatever number is contained in index to that particular element of the grade array, and returns that value. So getters are relatively straightforward things. Setters, I've put in here an example of a pretty simple setter. And there's some more complicated ones that actually do return values that we'll see that are defined in the book, and we'll talk about what the reason is for having these more complicated setters. This is a very simple setter that allows you to set the name. Notice that in this case it doesn't return anything. It's simply, but it does require a passed parameter, because if you want to set the internal variable, the instance variable, the field, to a particular value, you have to pass a parameter to tell it what value you want to set it to. So in this case, we're passing a string and calling it the name. The only statement in the setter is take the value that's in the name and assign it to this dot name, which is the instance variable called name for this particular object. So that's pretty straightforward and understandable. Let's see if we can go on before I run out of my 10-minute time limit for YouTube. Let's take a look at a little bit more complicated setters. And specifically, here's one that allows us to set the grade. Now, to set the grade, we have to tell it which grade we want. So we have to pass it a parameter that's the index of the grade we want to set. And then also we need to give it the value of the new grade, which is, of course, a double, because the grade array is a double array. Now, the first question we ask is, if the new grade is less than 0, or if the grade array is equal to null, we'll return false. Notice that the setGrade routine has a return value of Boolean. Return false means, tried to set the grade for you, sorry, couldn't do it, either because the grade was invalid, it was less than 0, it was a negative grade, which I know all of you hope you don't ever get any negative grades, or because this dot grade array is equal to null, which since the grade array has not yet been initialized, so there's no place to put it. So in that case, we return false. But if neither one of those is true, we say this dot grade array sub index equals the new grade, and we return true. And here's another important thing about this particular setter. Notice that it has two return statements. Up to this point, we've pretty much only seen one return statement in routines that return a value. But you can have more than one return statement. So if we're going to return false, return it up here. If the operation failed, we return true if the operation was successful. Here's another little bit more complicated setter. This is allowing us to set the entire grade array to some value. So notice that the passed parameter here is a double array, and then we're calling it the array. Now this works a little bit differently. This can return either true or false as well, but we're doing it a little bit different way. We set up a Boolean variable, we're calling it result. We set it initially to false. We're assuming, unless we hear otherwise, this operation didn't work. We ask ourselves the question, if this dot grade array is equal to null, which means it hasn't been initialized up to this point, so it hasn't been initialized, then we set the array into this dot grade array. Now what's that all about? Well, we're asking the question, if the grade array hasn't been initialized, we'll allow the user to initialize it to this value. If the grade array is initialized, in other words, this dot grade array is not equal to null, then we're not going to let this happen. So that prevents you from inadvertently replacing the grade array with a new grade array that contains new grades that are potentially bonus. So, and in this case, you'll notice then we set the result to true. And then what we return is the value of the variable called result. So this is one of the important reasons for having getters and setters. This setter is a very good example, as is this one up here, of one that not only sets the value of the internal of the instance variable, but it also controls when it's going to allow it to happen. It's only going to allow it to happen if the grade array has not been initialized up to this point. If it has been initialized up to this point, then it is it's not going to let it happen. This will not. This case situation will be false. We'll fall through to this statement down here and return the result. We'll come back in part 2 to do a little bit of debugging to see exactly how this works. And then also here we're going to do a little bit more work on this set name routine to give it a little bit more error checking as well, to make sure that we don't set a name into the instance variable called name if it's not necessary. So this is section 11.5.1. We'll terminate this, and then we'll have another part for 11.2.5 to talk about that section a little bit more, and with that we may go on to 11.6 and talk about name.